you're interested in football, there's an awful lot more football on television almost every night in one way or another. You could watch football and do nothing else. If you're not interested in football, you may well be living with someone who is, or know someone, a friend who is. And if you don't have any interest in football, I suggest this podcast you should listen to, because it will inform you the way it informed me. And the story is quite shocking. It is really about people running a sport in a way that doesn't benefit anybody except the television companies and FIFA and UEFA, who are the organizations that run football and make money from tournaments such as the World Cup, the European Championships, and all the other championships that they run. To discuss this now, we're joined by Richard Fitzpatrick, an Irish journalist, a very good Irish journalist who lives and works in Spain. And it's a pleasure to welcome Richard to the podcast. Richard, thank you very much for joining us today. And the information that you supplied me to fill out my own, I've been expressing the view for a long time, Richard, that we're asking too much of players, far too much, because they will be injury prone, they'll have shorter careers, and there's only so much you can do to the human body without damaging it. Now we have facts, and amazingly, UEFA and FIFA have upped the number of games they want players to play. One example that you gave me was that in the Champions League, they've increased the number of games per season by 50%, from 125 to 189. There's also a new competition which will run for a month. It's a Club World Cup, which is a nonsense. And the World Cup in 2026 will have, I understand, 48 nations in it. This is madness. Richard, can you tell me how the big Spanish clubs and indeed the people of Spain are reacting to this? Because there is resistance from English players.
Yeah, both the players and the federations have been very vocal in coming out against FIFA and UEFA in their expanded competitions. Just the players, for example, Dani Carvajal is very vocal. Over the last couple of months, Real Madrid's star player has won 6 European Cups. Jules Koundé, star player with Barca, French guy, also very vocal. And sadly, very ironically for poor Dani Carvajal, he suffered a cruciate knee ligament injury about a week or 2 weeks ago, just before the international break, in a club game for Real Madrid, only days after criticising the expanded calendar. A similar thing happened to Rodri, one of the most vocal critics in the English Premier League, who is, of course, Spain's star player.
And a hugely important player for Manchester City, one of the best players in the world. He's also out for the season.
With a cruciate,
yes,
knee injury. And as I mentioned, the federations, La Liga, President Javier Tebas is leading the charge in the courts against FIFA for expanding or for proposing their Club World Cup, which will go ahead next June. He is very worried about, player fatigue, but he's worried about his own product as well. The leagues will get diluted with all these domestic leagues, and he's supported by the English Premier League, the French Liga, Italian Serie A as well. In this battle, it's just a nonsense. There's been games twice every 3 days since the middle of August. You've got expanded another international window. You now have one in September, October, November. The UEFA Champions League expansion to the Swiss model. Obviously, it's done for money because it's increased the pool of games. There's more games, more TV income, more games, or more money doled out to the clubs and UEFA, which get about 40% of that income. But on the face of it, it's just completely illogical, because you used to have a system last season, and a lot of people were critical of the pool stages of the Champions League last season. Last few seasons, they weren't competitive. We all knew more or less the clubs that were going to waltz through into the last 16, with one or two cases aside. This season now you have 36 clubs instead of 32, and now instead of vying for 16 places in the knockout stages, they're vying for 24 places. So the jeopardy is completely gone out the window. So, and you have this laughable Swiss model system where you have a league set up, but we don't know, the teams are just playing each other ad hoc. It's very hard as a fan looking into to judge, well, who's our enemy here, or who are we competing against, because you don't have face-to-face, essentially knockout ties, which you did have last season in the final round of pool games.
Just let me give an example to our listeners of player fatigue and the damage overplaying does. Pedri plays for Barcelona, he plays for Spain. He's a brilliant young player. He broke into the Barcelona team when he was a teenager, and he played 73 games for Barcelona and Spain in the season 2020-2021, including the Euro 2020 finals and the Olympics. He broke down with injury, and since then, in the 3 seasons since then, he's only played 30% of the games. That's due to muscle injuries, and clearly fatigue makes you tired, makes you more injury prone, and that is one of the best young players in the world, and you can measure the damage that was done to him by playing too much.
Yeah, that's a very notable case, and one of many around muscle injuries, because there's been a lot of high-profile cruciate knee ligament injuries.
Yes, it's an injury I know. Mentioned. Now, when I was playing, Richard, that injury was the end of your career.
Yeah.
Now, they can fix it up to a point.
Yeah.
But there's people who believe that after a cruciate knee ligament injury, you're never quite the same. It's a knee ligament, and it's critical for turning, and it's also vulnerable to tiredness. And as most muscles are, it's less resilient when you're playing and overworking it.
Yeah, Gavi, interestingly, he's the other great star player to come through for Barca in the last few years, capped by Spain at 17 and amassed 25, 27 caps by the time he got injured last season for Spain with a cruciate. He came back, played a few minutes for first game back in 12 months for Barca on Sunday night. There was a standing ovation for him, but his game is built around his engine, and you'd worry about fatigue affecting him later in his career.
There's another young player that you noted for me, Ansu Fati. He's the youngest ever player to score for Barca in the Champions League as a 16-year-old. And yet, by the age of 19, he'd had 4 knee operations, which is really dramatic and terribly sad.
Terribly sad. You alluded to it earlier. Knee injuries at that gravity, the player is never the same again. He was out on loan last season at Brighton and didn't function. He's back now at Barca. They were trying to sell him during the summer, but he'll never be the player he could have been, unfortunately.
Is there an awareness? Clearly there is an awareness, Richard. Rodri in England expressed himself. There's matches, they're playing 2 games a week, and they're 2 very competitive games, because the new Champions League, as you pointed out, is much more competitive than the old one. For example, Liverpool have to play Real Madrid soon, which is incredible in the early rounds of what's supposed to be a competition that, weeds out the weak from the strong. What's the reaction in Spain from the public? Because there is a feeling here that we're seeing too much football on television almost every night. And what's the reaction from the players?
Yeah, the public definitely definitely there's a fatigue factor because the games just run onto each other. There's no season end like this with this Club World Cup now. The season will run on to the middle of July again next summer after last summer's European Championships and the Copa America in the States. And the players are furious, the high-profile players, because curiously, it's the elite players who suffer the most here because they're the ones that are flogged. Squads now are so big, 24 players in a squad, all of them, at the top 8 or 10 clubs they're all internationals, so they can afford or they have a lot of luxury players. I mean, you think of, say, Aston Villa when they won the league title in 1981, they used 14 players for the whole season.
Yes,
and that would never, that just doesn't happen anymore. So it's the top players and they're feeling the brunt of it. They're the ones getting the injuries, and they're the ones who are being vocal and coming out against it.
Yes, you actually provided me with another fact, which is shocking, and it does concern top players. Theoretically, you point out, Manchester City players, and they're the best team in Europe, certainly more likely to go on. Manchester City players could play 86 games this season if they progress in all competitions. Now, on one level, that's funny, Richard, but on another level, it's tragic. And we must note again that one of their key players, Rodri, is already out, having got an injury. He's out for the season, a knee injury, 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's including international games for their international countries, and the players today, they granted they don't play on the heavy surfaces they used to. The pitches now are immaculate, but the number of miles or kilometers they cover in a game has just transformed in the last 30 years. So that they're completely flogged when they're playing. Especially the last few years, like gone is the tiki-taka football is not so popular anymore. It's so physical now. Look at the way Guardiola is changing his philosophy. It's all about endurance and power now. So the players are put to the pin of their collar.
Now, there is a case that was taken. It's separate to what we've been talking about, which we'll come back to, but it is a case that I'm very interested in, and I'm sure football people in particular will be. Lassana Diarra, he took a case, he's a footballer, against FIFA, and the European Court of Justice found that what FIFA were doing to this player and denying him was contrary to EU law. It didn't make major headlines in Britain, but it is potentially as significant as the Bosman ruling all those years ago, which also, when it was first announced, didn't make a big headline, but had a profound effect on football.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of similarities with the Bosman case.
Yes.
Lass, although he's a more high-profile player.
I should just explain to our listeners what the Bosman case was about. Bosman was a Belgian. He played in Belgium, and he wanted to leave the club after serving out his 2-year contract.
Yeah.
They said, and football rules said, you can't leave, you're our player. He went to court, and the European Court of Justice ruled that once you served your 2 years that you signed your contract for, you can't be stopped, because football is not a sport. They ruled it's a business. And that's key, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the clubs involved, Liège, and I think it was Dunkirk, he was going to move across the border to France. His old club, Liège, were looking for $500,000 at the time compensation. But it ushered in a system where players were allowed to move on a free transfer. The big case I remember at the time in the 90s was Steve McManaman running down his contract at Liverpool, and he went to Real Madrid in 99 and prospered there, but Liverpool lost a huge transfer fee as a result. So this case with Lass, as he was known in Spain, he played for 3 years with Real Madrid. He's a holding midfielder. He was sacked by his club in Lokomotiv Moscow in Russia. they discharged him for performance issues. The club had run out of money. That was the real thing that was going on there. But he was blocked from moving to Charleroi, a team in the Belgian league, similarly to Bosman. And he was involved in a case with that FIFA was adjudicating on, and he ended up losing that case. He got a fine of about €10 million, and he was banned from the game for 15 months. So he brought his case to the European Court of Justice, and back in, I think it was December 2015, it was a long, long time ago, but they only ruled a couple of weeks ago on it, ruling in his favour, as you say,
yes.
Based on two principles: that it was anti-competitive in blocking Charleroi from signing him, and secondly, more importantly for LAS and for the future of football, or the future of the transfer market, it ruled that it contravened EU law on freedom of movement. So it's opened up a can of worms now.
Yes. And I mean, much of what we're talking about, the expansion of the World Cup, the invention of the Club World Cup, it's about making money for FIFA, UEFA, and the greedy clubs, and also about the greed of the television companies who would really like to have television on 7 nights a week. As it stands, you could watch football in Dublin, for example, 5 nights a week quite comfortably.
Yeah, exactly. Those forces are the three forces at the root of it: TV, clubs, and the governors, ostensibly, of the game, UEFA and FIFA. The problem, the clubs can't help themselves because they just want more money to pay more transfer fees and salaries to the players. Somebody needs to help them out with their addiction. That should fall on the governors of football, UEFA and FIFA. But the problem is that they don't act in the interests of players or clubs. They act out of self-interest, out of greed. They just want to make more money for themselves. So that's why you've this nonsense of an expanded Club World Cup next summer. Yes. Gianni Infantino, he makes up the rules as he goes along. He's just a couple of days ago, he invited into Miami into the tournament in a wildcard entry because he couldn't play this tournament in America without Messi, the biggest star in football. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just to increase the money that goes into their pockets.
How does all of this impact the small clubs who don't have big squads and huge amount of players?
Yeah, look, it's not good. If we just take the last case alone, what will likely happen, that it's just rolled a chunk of dynamite into the transfer system. Now, the court has got back to the appeals court in Belgium, so we await the final outcome there. But theoretically, what will happen is that the smaller clubs will lose out because players will become free agents, just like somebody who's employed by a company in the business world. They'll be able to give their notice a month out and transfer to a different club. The big clubs won't have to pay big compensation to extract the players from their contracts, so they'll feed on the smaller clubs and pulling out their better players and bringing them off to the big clubs. So yes, it won't look good for the smaller clubs.
Now, Richard, let me ask you about Spain. Has always been in the market, and Real Madrid in particular have always been in the market for the best player in the world, whether it's David Beckham back in the day or Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo, and all of these great players. They have just recruited Mbappe, who is, many people think, not me, but many people do think he is the best player in the world. And he was able to leave Paris Saint-Germain, go straight to Madrid. The sums involved, you can tell us if you want to make us envious, are fantastic in terms of the salary he received. And Perez, the president of Real, wanted him. How's it working out, Richard? Because I don't think it's going great. And now I place no judgment on this at all, but as a matter of fact for our listeners. Mbappe has been accused by somebody in Sweden of rape in the last week, but that's a matter we know nothing about. But it is a fact, isn't it?
Yeah, last Monday this story broke. A tabloid newspaper in Sweden broke it, and it was followed up by the Swedish public broadcaster who cited Mbappe as being the guy at the eye of the storm. It happened the previous Thursday night. He was in Stockholm, went out for dinner with some friends, and then onto nightclub V. And a woman has brought this alleged rape case against him. He was staying in a hotel, I think it's called Bank in Stockholm. Mbappe was straight out the gap, denying the allegations on Twitter, or X as it's called now,
yes.
Describing it as fake news. It was curious. He alluded to, he was saying that it was a setup orchestrated by Paris Saint-Germain. He said it was no surprise that this was happening at this time, because there was a hearing the following day in the French courts about money he's owed, 55 million in wages, unpaid wages by Paris Saint-Germain. So that was a kind of bizarre twist to the story. But we don't know anything more beyond it now, but it is being investigated. So,
how has he settled into the team? And I know that might sound like a stupid question when we've been discussing something as grave as rape, but it is at this stage just an allegation. He's having a tough enough time, isn't he? Although Real Madrid are top of the league, I believe.
They're 3 points adrift of Barca. They were tied until Barca won their game in hand on Sunday night. But he had a slow start. He did score in the European Super Cup final against Atalanta in his first game, and then he couldn't score for, I think, about 5 games without scoring, and then scored a penalty. And he's now got 6 league goals. 3 of those are penalties. So he's coming around.
Right.
I mean, he is box office, as you say. Is he the best player in the world? It's definitely a conversation between him and Vinicius and Haaland, I would say.
Yes.
But he's blockbuster. I mean, 80,000 people queued in the baking heat in Madrid in July to see his presentation. That's just him running out onto the pitch to do a few keepy uppies.
Yeah, it wasn't a match day. It was just a normal day.
Yeah. It's huge. It was the same number that came out to see Cristiano Ronaldo in 2009, but that, like no other player in La Liga over the last 20 years, would command an audience like that. Ancelotti is having difficulties organising all these star players. Real Madrid very stealthily have built up the richest squad in the world, like surpassing Manchester City. They've now 3 of the best 5 players in the world: Bellingham, Vinicius, and Mbappe. They also have Rodrigo, who would be in the top 10 as well.
Yes.
So he's having a lot of trouble fitting those pieces of the jigsaw together. 3 of the players, Vinicius, Rodrigo, and Mbappe, their preferred position is on the left. So you have Rodrigo playing out a position on the right up front, and then Mbappe and Vinicius are interchanging in the middle as a false 9 and over on the left. And then Bellingham has lost his position. He was false 9 last year, scored for free. He'd scored 10 goals by this time last season. Now he's scored nothing. And Mbappe, it's like early days, but he will triumph at the club, I'm sure. But Ancelotti is it's not happening for him getting this system to work, and it's created a huge amount of pressure on Ancelotti and the club.
Yes,
the fans already at the Bernabeu are whistling the players because of their lackluster performances. They're very porous, as you can imagine, with 4 attacking players. So,
it doesn't work.
No,
to have every team needs a balance. But I'm sure Ancelotti knows this. He is one of the great men of football, one of the great coaches of all time, and was, in fact, a great player. He won Champions League medals as a player as well, as I think 5 or 6 times as a coach. Just one final question, Richard, to bring us back to where we started in a way. And this people will remember Spain are the European champions. They won the European Championships last summer. And the player who stood out from all the others was Lamine Yamal. He was 16, and they were comparing him to Pele and to Messi and all of these great players. But he played 50 games last season for Barca and for Spain as a 16-year-old. And these are pressure games. It's not like playing with your mates when you're 16, 17. This is heavy-duty stuff. He has, I take it, survived that. I mean, they had two fantastic wingers, hadn't they? And he was one of them.
Yeah, he has. It's amazing watching Barca.
He plays for Barca.
Yeah, are playing up in Montjuic. They're out at the Camp Nou at the moment for a couple of years because of reconstruction. They're hoping to get back in likely next spring, maybe later. But when you're up there watching the games, there's a gasp of air around the stadium when he gets on the ball. He's just, it's a physical thing. He was Player of the Month last season. Just got the award at the weekend in La Liga. He's just breathtaking to watch. But as we be discussing, you would really, really worry about fatigue. 50 games, that's inhuman for a 16-year-old at that level. Like, and Messi is the obvious comparison. He made his debut in November 2003 in a exhibition game against Porto, against Jose Mourinho's Porto side. And he didn't play again. He'd made his league debut 12 months later. He was 17 at that stage. So Rijkaard was the Barca manager at the time. He was very cautious in blooding him.
Yes.
That was the way to go, but that doesn't happen anymore. Now the clubs are particularly Barca, are under so much pressure financially at the moment. They can't afford to rest him. He's a guy the club who need money were offered 250 million before the Euros from Paris Saint-Germain. I mean, that figure would increase now, given he scored the goal of the tournament. He's just electrifying. So hopefully he'll keep his health.
Okay, Richard, it's fascinating to talk to you, and we're very grateful to you for joining us today. That's Richard Fitzpatrick. Richard is an Irishman, a top-class journalist working in Spain.